Singapore's economy shrinks again, but there are some signs of improvement, especially in manufacturing.
Zero COVID-19 cases in the dorms for the second straight day, but Minister Lawrence Wong says we still need to keep our guard up.
And a new era for Apple's iPhone. The iPhone 12 lineup is the first to support 5G technology.
Hello, you're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
I'm Haryanto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
So, Singapore's economy is either contracting or growing depending on which statistic you're looking at. Well, let's explain. Year-on-year GDP in the third quarter shrank by 7%, improving on a 13.2% plunge in the second quarter.
But slightly worse than the negative 6.8% economists had expected. The reason? Well, the construction sector remained extremely weak even as manufacturing returned to growth.
Well, quarter-on-quarter, GDP in Q3 rebounded by 7.9% thanks to the gradual reopening of the economy in June after the two-month circuit breaker.
Today's figures are based on advanced estimates by the Trade and Industry Ministry.
We're happy to have Song Seng-Win on the show to make sense of the latest figures. He's an economist at CIMB Private Banking. Now, Seng-Win, manufacturing was the bright spot in Q3. Services producing industries also saw improvement, but the construction sector remains weak. So when do you think we'll be able to see a more broader-based recovery?
I think we all like to see it broadening far more quickly than what we are currently witnessing, but obviously the challenge remains. The pandemic is still resurfacing, is still, I suppose, spreading in different parts of the world. The challenge remains. Some industries still will be facing significant headwind. For instance, last December, we saw over 1.7 million tourists. On average, we saw 1.6 million tourists last year. We are going to be very well short of that figure, even as we open up travel lane, green lane, because these are still very much for business-related travel. So we are going to be significantly short of visitor arrivals. Obviously, that will have implication for those in the travel, leisure. So that's an example where some industries will still be facing significant headwind, whereas those within Singapore that you and I participate in terms of consumer-facing industries are seeing better numbers, but they are also not completely out of the woods yet.
Lots of numbers today for the report, Seng-Win, but what do the numbers mean for the average person? Does it translate to job security, career progression, and even zero pay cards, among other factors?
Yeah, we are all keeping our fingers crossed. Obviously, the longer the recession drags on, yes, we have seen a significant recovery quarter on quarter, basically because we have seen restriction being eased. The challenge is maintaining that recovery, the pace of the recovery going into 4Q. So I think jobs continue to be at risk, even though we have done quite a bit in terms of trying to create, maintain, or even retrain some jobs to create opportunities. So bottom line here is there's still risks labor market, there's still job cuts that's still to come. So for all of us, it's really about keeping our fingers crossed that we see more broader based recovery, but that will be taking time over the coming quarters. So it is still, I think, very vulnerable as far as jobs and the job market is concerned, given that the recovery is still somewhat bumpy and uneven.
Now, Seng-Win, separately, Parliament is debating the third Supplementary Supply Bill, which provides for an extra $8 billion in COVID-19 support, definitely helpful for Singaporeans. But what are the risks of prolonging government support?
If we look at I suppose, government finance this year, it will be a fairly deep sort of a budget deficit. It will be the worst as far as Singapore history, short history is concerned, in terms of we having to spend more, providing relief measures, providing either to businesses, to household, to the vulnerable segment of society. So all these things essentially means that it provides some support, and cushion the impact on the labor market in that the unemployment rate could have been worse if not for the fact that businesses were incentivized to retain workers. So I would say the government is still, I think, expected to register a budget deficit, perhaps smaller one next year versus this year. So it may be that kind of scenario we continue to see, where the government support still is very important as private sector investment is perhaps slowly coming back. So that's essentially the key. If private sector is spending less or not confident enough to spend as much, government sector comes in to provide the support, to create the jobs, to essentially just cushion the economy as we await a broad-based global recovery that would then lift Singapore. Remember, Singapore economy is very dependent on external trade, in goods and services, that 3 times the size of the economy. So we need external wing to sort of, in a sense, get going again. But we obviously don't know to what extent, when and how that will come through to lift us up. So government spending, I think, will still be quite critical as we head towards the end of this financial year and at the start of the new one.
Great insights there, Seng Woon. Thanks for coming on to the show. I've been speaking to Song Seng Woon, economist at CIMB Private Banking.
Here's an update on the COVID-19 situation in Singapore. 5 new cases were confirmed today. They included 2 cases in the community and 0 from the foreign worker dormitories.
The remaining 3 were imported, all of whom had been placed on stay-home notices upon their arrival here. More details will be released tonight.
In other local news, in a Facebook post this morning, Education Minister Lawrence Wong, who's also co-chair of the COVID-19 Multi-Ministry Task Force, warned against complacency and said Singapore will likely see new cases over time. His remarks come as 0 local infections were reported yesterday for the first time in more than 6 months. Mr. Wong said the virus has not been eradicated and it's still circulating in our community. He added, though, that he understood people feel tired about the current measures and want to resume more activities. In his post, Mr. Wong also thanked frontliners and all who have been working hard to control the infection over the past few months.
Briton Paul Jonathan Gold was fined $3,000 for flouting safe distancing measures and taking part in an unlawful gathering on Lazarus Island on August 8th. He was part of a 12-person gathering on the island that violated COVID-19 regulations that prohibit social gatherings of more than 5 people who don't stay in the same place of residence. The fine was imposed in lieu of 6 days in jail.
7 people linked to Singapore shipbuilding firm Keppel Fells were charged with multiple corruption-related offences today. Among them was yard manager Alvin Lim Wee Lun, who was charged with 46 counts of conspiring with 2 others to obtain bribes to advance the business interests of multiple subcontractors. The trio is alleged to have worked together to obtain nearly $880,000 in bribes from 3 subcontractors, which they intended to share. They are set to appear in court again on November the 11th.
In Parliament today, various MPs took issue with non-constituency MP Leong Man Wai's remarks during the debate on the 3rd Supplementary Supply Bill.
In his speech, Mr. Leong questioned the need for the rise of various taxes and costs, including MediShield Life premiums, electricity tariffs and ERP.
It is crucial that our population has unshakable faith in the government to lead them. However, the government does not inspire confidence by hastily increasing taxes and fees, while at the same time pledging COVID-19 support measures. Our population could view this act as giving with one hand and taking with the other.
Mr. Leong went on to describe Singapore Power as a monopolist that did not generate electricity but earned billions of dollars when they announced the raising of electricity tariffs for the 4th quarter of 2020. He added that these were costs that could have been absorbed instead of being passed on to consumers.
Well, Second Minister for Manpower and Trade and Industry Tan See Leng took issue with the suggestion that SP was being opportunistic when they raised electricity tariffs. He clarified that the hike was primarily due to fuel costs and that SP did not directly benefit from the increase in tariffs.
I guess I'm a bit disappointed in the sense that, I'm past my 50-year mark, and in all my 50-odd years, this is the first time I've seen the government spending so much to support all of us here in this country. Now,
others who expressed concern at his statements included MP Cheryl Chan and Senior Minister of State for Transport, Chee Hong Tat. They responded by explaining SP's ability to pass on costs and whether the government should be involved in the building of the future economy.
Well, let's bring in political correspondent Lynette Lai to help us digest what the MPs brought up. Lynette, first, before we get into what happened in Parliament today, could you first summarise what this debate is about and what we can expect for the rest of today as well as tomorrow?
So to set a bit of context, last week, Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat delivered a ministerial statement which summarised Singapore's fiscal position and its strategies to tackle the crisis. So this set the context for the third Supplementary Supply Bill, and today and tomorrow we will see MPs debating the bill. They'll be raising questions, they'll be making proposals, and finally DPM Heng will be rounding everything up.
Right. Now, Lynette, earlier we showed short clips of the exchange between opposition MP Leong Man Wai and Tan See Leng. Now, he's the Second Minister for Trade and Industry and Manpower. What were the notable proposals or questions raised for you?
So, like you mentioned earlier, I think Mr. Leong's broader point was why certain tax and fee hikes have to take place now when the economy is not in good shape. So it was not just about electricity tariffs, but also MediShield Life premium increases, things like that. And like you said, it led to quite an interesting exchange. There were also some questions on more big picture issues. So, for example, Mr. Liang Eng Hwa, who chairs the Government Parliamentary Committee for Finance and Trade and Industry, he opened the debate and he asked questions about, for example, payment milestones for development projects that are coming up, how Singapore can afford this if our revenue situation remains weak.
Right. Well, also on the subject of notable proposals, we were discussing briefly off-air, and we thought that what Mr. Melvin Yong said about the right to disconnect was pretty interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's a topic that's come up a lot in the past few months. As everyone works from home, some people have found that it's quite hard to disconnect when your work and your personal life begins to blur into each other. So in that sense, it is very important. It helps you maintain some of their work-life separation. But at the same time, another thing that we've been talking about is flexible working hours. And I think part of that may involve also doing work outside your normal working hours. What I mean is, for example, if during the day you take 1 or 2 hours off to pick up your kids from school, to run errands, prepare dinner, it only makes sense that you make up for it later at night when normally you would not be working. But I think, the idea of maybe blackout hours where, it's not reasonable for you to expect people to be checking their emails at midnight. And that's the kind of mentality we should have.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Lynette, for coming onto the show to speak with us. That was political correspondent at the Straits Times, Lynette Lai. Now, you can read all about today's Parliament proceedings at straitstimes.com.
Well, also raised in Parliament, satellite career centres are not just for white-collar job seekers. Manpower Minister Josephine Teo clarified this in response to MP Gerald Giam's query on whether unskilled job seekers can get help through other channels besides SG United Jobs and Skills Centres.
It has actually been easier to match people in non-PMAT roles. I don't have the numbers offhand, but I can assure you that the matching for non-PMATs has actually been the majority of those under the SG United Jobs and Skills package.
Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Indrani Raja, also told Parliament today that the annual number of new permanent residents and citizens has remained stable for the last 5 years.
Close to 32,000 people were given PR status each year, and there have been over 22,000 new citizens every year on average, including about 1,600 children born overseas to Singaporean parents.
Ms. Indrani added that PR and citizenship statuses are selectively offered to applicants who are committed to making Singapore their home and who can integrate and contribute to the country.
New citizens either share family ties with Singaporeans or have studied, worked, or lived here for some time. They are drawn from the pool of qualified PRs who eventually make the serious commitment to take on citizenship.
In the global headlines, several coronavirus clusters have emerged in Australia's two most populous states, New South Wales and Victoria. 11 new cases were locally acquired and a cluster appeared in a southwest Sydney suburb, and these have prompted New South Wales to delay easing some restrictions involving restaurants and weddings. Meanwhile, Victoria State, the epicenter of Australia's second wave, logged 5 deaths and 7 new cases overnight.
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for new measures to encourage young people from Hong Kong to move to China. This is part of measures to integrate the semi-autonomous territory with the mainland following student-led protests last year. Speaking in Shenzhen, he said China should fully utilize the important platform of Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau cooperation to attract more young people from Hong Kong and Macau to study, work and live in the mainland.
A survey in the US found that nearly 3/4 of Indian Americans plan to vote for Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden in next month's election, believing the country is headed in the wrong direction under President Donald Trump. Indian Americans make up less than 1% of registered voters, but both parties have reached out to the community in case they become important in the event of a close vote. The Indian community is also in the spotlight after Mr. Biden picked Senator Kamala Harris, the daughter of an Indian immigrant, as his running mate.
Heads up, all Apple fans in Singapore, now you can pre-order the new iPhone 12 and iPhone 12 Pro from 8 p.m. this Friday, with sales starting on October 23rd. This comes as the tech giant announced 4 new iPhone 12 models this morning. The other 2 models are the iPhone 12 Pro Max as well as a new entry to the series, the iPhone 12 Mini, which Apple claims is the smallest, thinnest and lightest 5G smartphone. Pre-orders for both will begin at 9 p.m. on November 6th, with availability beginning on November 13th. Prices for the iPhone 12 starts from 1,299 Singapore dollars, while the iPhone 12 Mini starts from $1,149.
Well, those iPhones look so good. Will you be getting one when it comes out?
Because my phone is the latest iteration now, which is the 11 Pro Max.
Right.
So I don't think I will be. But the thing also is, not only is it expensive, it's a bit costly, right? But it doesn't come with a charger.
Yeah.
And the earphones as well.
Right. No, I see your point, for sure. So Harianta will not be getting it, but I'm going to try to push our executive producer to get the iPhone 12 because hers is an iPhone 6. So maybe it's time, you know, for a new phone, right? So for more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Harianto Diman with Olivia Koeh. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.